Hello, hello. What's up, everybody? It is Adrian, and it's been a while since I was on here. It is about to be week 12 in college football, and I got to thinking about college quarterbacks, getting prepared for the draft in a couple months here. And yeah, it's going to be kind of like a random. It's going to be my top 10 QB prospects for the 2025 NFL draft. And yeah, I think I got some good guys in here for you. So I want to hop right into it. Start talking about the guys. As you can see, I'm gonna go from 1 to 10, and then I'm gonna have some honorable mentions at the bottom too. But at number one, I think it's only fair to say that Shedeur Sanders is maybe not running away with it, but he's the only guy that is like the obvious. I don't even want to say obvious, but he's definitely the number one guy right now. That could change. There's still like a month of college football plus the playoffs. So we'll see if people pass him or if he starts having some bad games or something. But right now, he's the number one guy. He's obviously at Colorado, 2,882 yards he's thrown for, 24 touchdowns to 6 interceptions. That is with a terrible offensive line. He's been sacked 28 times, which is one of the top numbers in the NCAA. Some things to say about him. I mean, Colorado hasn't really played any huge games. Kansas State is, I guess, arguably the best team that they've played, and they lost, but Shedeur Sanders did still look solid against them. If Colorado can somehow sneak into the playoffs, I think it'll be a really good test for Shedeur Sanders against a really good team. Now, that being said, Colorado also doesn't have really good talent. I mean, they have like Travis Hunter and a couple other guys there along with Shedeur Sanders, but he's not working with the greatest talent either. So maybe once he gets to the NFL and he has some really talented players around him, things will be explosive. But speaking of Shedeur Sanders, he's improved every year despite the offense not having the talent, like I just said, of some of the bigger name schools in the country. I think some of the downsides for him, he needs to learn kind of when to throw the ball away or maybe take off and run instead of holding on. That's not all of those sacks are because of his terrible O line. Some of it's on him for holding onto the ball a little too long. Um, that's like one of his only bad traits, though. I mean, I guess you could say some people say that there's like some possible character concerns simply because he's a bit eccentric. I think he says what he wants to say. He doesn't like get stopped by by speaking in front of like the media, where he might say something that people take the wrong way, I suppose. But character concerns is very debatable. A lot of people just love this guy and say he's a great teammate and a great leader in the locker room. He's got a good arm. He's pretty accurate. He's a legacy athlete, of course. Deion Sanders, his father and coach. Um, so he's clearly got some talent he was just born with that other people don't have. Um, yeah, everything points to him being a first round pick in this coming year. And right now, I'm going to predict where all these guys go to as well. Right now, for Shedeur Sanders, I have him going in the first round as the first quarterback off the board to the Las Vegas Raiders. I think Raiders fans would be fine with that. I think he'd look good in black, and I think he would crush it in Vegas. I don't know about year one. They have a few. They're lacking talent as well, but I think he'd be very good for the Raiders, and I think that'd be a great pick for them. I don't even know who's going to be their coach, if Antonio Pierce is still going to be there or not, but I think Shedeur Sanders could be starting week one for the Raiders if that does happen. Next, at number two, I think this is pretty obvious right now as well. Cam Ward out of Miami looks like the top guy right now. I mean, a lot of people, like including me, say Shedeur Sanders, but Cam Ward, he's leading the NCAA in yards right now with 3,494 yards. And also, I believe he's leading in touchdowns with 32 touchdowns. And he's only thrown 6 interceptions. So, stat wise, he is the top guy. And looks wise, he looks pretty dang good as well. Uh, he's come all the way from playing at Incarnate Ward, not being a very highly ranked recruit out of high school. He went to Washington State. I could be wrong about that. I didn't look up to verify, but I think it was Washington State. where he did well as well. And now he transferred to Miami this year, and he is exploding in that Miami offense. Now, one thing to say about that is that, like Colorado, there's no like huge games on Miami's schedule that can be like called an impressive win. So there is that going against him on this talented team. Miami most likely will be making the playoffs, depending on how the rest of the season goes. I expect them to be in the playoffs, though. And I think that's going to be a large factor in Cam Ward's draft stock come playoff time. Because if he plays somebody like Alabama or Georgia and he looks really good, teams won't really have any excuse, I don't think, to not draft him in the first round. Now, if he plays one of those teams, or Texas or Ohio State, whoever, and he looks bad, then question marks might arise. Although, unless he completely flops, I think he's still going to be a first round pick. I mean, the guy has a good arm. He's apparently a great leader. He's great within the pocket. Doesn't run very much, but he can if he wants to. He just really doesn't ever. I think he's going to be a first round pick as well. And my prediction at the moment is he is the second quarterback off the board, drafted to the Tennessee Titans. Now, that depends on how Will Levis finish out the year for the Titans as well. But as of right now, Will Levis, I don't think, has proven to be their guy. And if they have the opportunity, I think Cam Ward could definitely be their quarterback of the future there. And I think he'd probably be starting day one, too. I can't wait to see both those guys, Shedeur Sanders and Cam Ward, in the NFL next year. I think it's going to be so fun to watch. Number 3 quarterback, and the definite number 3 for me right now, is Quinn Ewers out of Texas. He's the first guy that has some like pretty big red flags, though, also. This year he's thrown for 1,722 yards, 19 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions. He's played in quite a few big games with mostly success. He was the top recruit in 2021 out of high school, but he hasn't fully lived up to those expectations. His biggest red flag is that he has had multiple injuries, gets hurt every year, and I mean, when he's playing against even bigger guys in the NFL, faster, stronger guys, those injury concerns will be even higher. And occasionally he does have accuracy and decision-making issues as well, but his arm is the best arm in college football. I think that's not debatable. I mean, maybe someone in the comments can tell me if that's not the case in their opinion. I think Quinn Ewers has the biggest arm in football, though, and he can sling it anywhere on the field. Going into the NFL, he will still have one of the biggest arms in the NFL, which is crazy. He is a junior, so he could return to college next year. One thing, though, is that Arch Manning, of course, is on Texas waiting in the wings, and I think pretty much everyone expects Arch Manning to take over the Texas team at the quarterback position next year. So if Quinn Ewers does go back to school, he's most likely going to transfer to a different team. That being said, I think the possibility of being the number 1 overall quarterback in this draft, I mean, you can say Shedeur Sanders or Cam Ward. Like me, I'm saying it. I think they'll be drafted ahead of him, but Quinn Ewers is just so good, and Shedeur Sanders and Cam Ward aren't the clear and obvious number 1 pick, that Quinn Ewers could, in theory, hop up to that spot, especially if Texas will most likely be in the playoffs. And if Quinn Ewers has a huge playoff run, wins the college football championship, he could definitely go up to the number 1 quarterback spot. So I think he is going to look good in the playoffs, and while I still do have Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders drafted over him, I still think he's going to definitely be a first round draft pick, and I think he's going to leave Texas after this year. Right now, I have him going in the first round to the New York Football Giants. Go Big Blue. I'm a big Giants fan, and I would be pretty ecstatic if we got Quinn Ewers, honestly. I think if Brian Daboll's still on the team, Quinn Ewers would look really good. He'd probably be starting day 1 as well. The injury concern does make me a little scared, but, I mean, have a good backup in place behind him, I guess. That's the biggest thing to say about that. After Quinn Ewers, I think that's when, for me at least, the big question marks start to happen. At 4, I currently have Garrett Nussmeier out of LSU. Now, this is his first year starting, so a lot of these things can be questionable since he doesn't have a too much experience, but this year so far he's thrown for 2,866 yards, 21 touchdowns to 11 interceptions. He's had some good stats, as you can see, but he has struggled with some interceptions against the bigger teams on the schedule, and he has lost some of those bigger games as well, which has seemingly knocked LSU out of the playoffs, which is kind of huge. Garrett Nussmeier, he has a big arm. He can make all the throws that you need out of him. He's a good leader. He's got some of the best work ethic in all of NCAA probably. Probably the best out of all these top quarterback prospects, according to multiple articles, and teammates and coaches. And he's very accurate for the most part. Also, he's quite loyal. He's stuck with LSU his whole college career, despite being behind Jaden Daniels up until this year. And his father, I think his name's Nathan, possibly Nathan Nussmeier. Maybe I might be saying his dad's name wrong, but his father is a former NFL quarterback and the current quarterback coach of the Philadelphia Eagles. So he has a bit of quarterback blood in those veins as well. He is a gunslinger. He's got that mentality, almost Brett Favre-like, as some people say, which some teams like, some teams don't. I personally love gunslingers. I think they're always fun, but being a gunslinger, like I said earlier, with the interceptions, you always will have that potential to throw a big interception in a big moment, which not everybody likes. With LSU being out of the playoffs and Garrett Nussmeier being a junior, which means he has 1 year of eligibility still on the books, I think Garrett Nussmeier will probably want another shot at playoff glory in NCAA. So I do think he's going to return to LSU next year for his second year as a starter for that LSU team in the hopes of bringing home the trophy. So Garrett Nussmeier, I don't think will be in this draft. If he is, though, I think he's definitely a first-round talent. And I think he probably would be drafted in the first round. So keep an eye out for him. He could leave early. After Garrett Nussmeier, I have Jalen Milroe out of Alabama at number 5. This guy, he's all over the board. People think very highly of him or somewhat low of him. So this year, though, he has 2,046 yards passing, 13 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions. And on the ground, he adds another 565 rushing yards and 16 touchdowns on the ground. He is a massive threat with his legs, as you can tell from those stats. Now, Jalen Milroe's main issue, though, has been his passing abilities, which as a quarterback, that's a pretty big issue, and especially against good defenses. Jalen Milroe does have a good arm. He can make pretty much all the throws that you want him to make, but his decision-making and accuracy issues have shown up in the big spots, and that's going to push him down the board, honestly. Now, the past few weeks, he has been really good, especially with his legs. He is a junior, so he can go back if he wants to for a third year at Bama. But I don't know. I'm really torn on what Jalen Milroe is going to do. I think if Bama makes the playoffs, which I still think they're going to, although they've lost a couple games now, he could have a huge run in the playoffs and definitely leave, or he could either miss out on the playoffs entirely, which would be surprising to me, or he could have a bad game and get knocked out early in the playoffs against somebody like Georgia, Texas, whoever they end up playing. Now, I really don't know what to say about that until we see him in the playoffs. Right now, I see him as looking at the field as he could be a high round pick in the draft, first round pick. And right now, as it stands before week 12, I think he is probably leaning towards leaving for the NFL. Now, like I said, he could stay, but right now I have him leaving, and I do have him in the first round. Now, I know people are going to be like, dude, this is like this is the third guy that you've had in the first round. Yeah, I'm going to have more too, so get ready for it. I have him getting drafted in the first round to the Brownies, the Cleveland Browns. I think the Browns would like him a lot. I do think they're probably going to have a total rehaul at the coaching position, so Kevin Stefanski wouldn't be making this pick, so that's definitely going to change things as well. But I think he's got a lot of potential. Probably not going to be starting week 1. He's probably going to have to learn behind somebody. Hopefully not Deshaun Watson, but who knows. But yeah, I have him drafted in the first round to the Cleveland Browns as of right now. Could definitely see him go back, though, for Bama for a last season as well, though. We'll see. Next on my list, I have number 6, Drew Allar, out of Penn State. This is another guy that a lot of you are probably going to question here. This year, he's thrown for 2,006 yards, 13 touchdowns, and 5 interception. His biggest game was a loss to Ohio State, where he didn't look all that great. He didn't look terrible either, but you want to see him play really well against good college teams to get that first round, pedigree. If Penn State makes the playoffs, I think it'll be a big test for him to see if he wants to leave. He's a junior as well, to see if he wants to leave for the NFL. Now, that's if they make the playoffs. I think they will, but they might not. It depends on how the rest of the season goes for him. He does have a big arm. He's improved every year that he's been a starter there at Penn State, but sometimes he looks like a bit of a project to me still. So, like I said, if Penn State makes the playoffs and they do well, I think he could leave expecting to be picked in the first round. Much like I said about Jalen Milroe in the last guy I talked about. But I think what more than likely will happen is he's just going to look okay, and the field is going to be so saturated with relatively talented quarterbacks that he's going to look towards 2025 and see a pretty wide open field. You could make a case Arch Manning will be in 2025, or maybe Nico or Garrett Nussmeier, but none of those are guarantees. It depends on if Nussmeier comes out, if Arch comes out after his first year as a starter, which I don't think is going to happen. I think he's a 2026 guy. Same with Nico. So, I mean, Miller Moss, a couple other guys are there, but there's no one that really stands out, in my opinion, as the top guy. So I think Drew Allar could be a guy that looks at 2025, sees a wide open field, and stays at Penn State. So I do not have him going into the draft, but if he does, he's another guy that could be looked at as a first round pick. After Drew Allar, I have the last guy on my list that I have 10. I have a top 10 plus an extra couple, but this guy is the last guy on my list that I see as, well, I think there's a pretty solid drop off. I guess the next guy's not too bad either, but getting into this guy, Carson Beck at number 7 out of Georgia. Coming into this season, I had him as my number 1 guy. He had a really good year at Georgia last year. He won the title, looked good pretty much all year, and he was the number 1 guy. But this year he's had a bit of a drop off. He's thrown for 2,488 yards, 17 touchdowns, and 12 interceptions. The big problem about him is with those 12 interceptions, which is pretty high, he only has like an okay arm. Like, he can make most of the throws, but he's not going to have those like big throws. He's not going to look like Josh Allen or Matt Stafford out there, Cam Newton. His arm is only okay, so usually his accuracy is pretty good, but he's been making some pretty errant throws against some of the better defenses in the league, in the NCAA, which you don't like to see, seeing as, in the NFL, all the defenses will be relatively good comparatively. So his draft stock has definitely taken a hit, but Georgia still should be in the playoff hunt, and if he can have a really good playoff run, his draft stock should bump back up, and I still think he's definitely in the consideration for a first round pick. He's a really smart guy. He seems to make a lot of the better reads, but he also is a game manager type quarterback that, that's what people have labeled him as, the game manager of this draft class. And that doesn't excite everybody. Some teams like the Rams or the Bills, I already mentioned those quarterbacks, but they want more of a gunslinger type, you would think. Whereas a team like the 49ers seem to like, and Kyle Shanahan, they like the game manager types, seemingly. So, Carson Beck will be limited in teams that are going to really view him as a top pick, which means he could slip out of the first round. I do have him in the first round. He's my last first round quarterback, which there's 5 of them, and I realize that's high for a class that people, are saying is relatively weak, especially after there were, I think, 6 drafted last year. You don't usually see a lot of quarterbacks again, so Carson Beck's Carson Beck's probably the guy that I slide out of the first round if we have to slip somebody out right now. But as it stands, I have him drafted in the first round, and I do have the New York Jets taking him in towards the bottom or maybe middle of the first round. So he would probably be backing up Aaron Rodgers in year 1, maybe even third string behind Tyrod Taylor. If the team stays like that, if Rodgers stays on the Jets next year, he could even retire, or the Jets could maybe get rid of him. I don't know the contract situation there, but yeah, I have him being drafted in the first round to the New York Jets as it stands right now. Now, the Jets might not even take a quarterback. They have Aaron Rodgers, and they have a really good team, so they could just go with somebody off the cuff if Aaron Rodgers leaves. Or they could just stick with Aaron Rodgers and not draft a quarterback this year and maybe wait till next year. Who knows? But seeing as right now the Jets are probably not going to make the playoffs unless they make a big run to end the year, I see it as like, why not draft your quarterback of the future now, seeing as you have a talented roster and you probably want to be at a lower draft pick next year. So I have him picking Carson Beck to the New York Jets. Now, like I said, after Carson Beck, it's a bit of a drop-off in my opinion, although this next guy is uber talented in his own right, and that is Jaxson Dart out of Ole Miss. He lands at number 8 for me. Right now, he has thrown for 3,409 yards, 22 touchdowns to 4 interceptions, and added 304 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns on the ground. He also currently has the best QBR in the entire NCAA, which is pretty impressive. So, stat-wise, he is looking fantastic, which in theory would make him like a pretty solid first-round pick, But let's dig a little deeper into it. Now, Jaxson Dart has improved every year as a starter. He's looked very good for Ole Miss. He has them on the cusp of the playoffs, so to speak. I don't think they make the playoffs, but they definitely could if they can win out, I would say. Now, Jaxson Dart, he seems to step up in big moments. He has that it factor, in my opinion, and he does generally well against the tougher opponents on the schedule. If they make the playoffs, I think it'll be big. Actually, let me see if we have the updated. Where is Ole Miss right now ranked? I don't want to. Maybe I'm speaking stupidly about Ole Miss. Ole Miss ranking. Bear with me. They are currently, as of yesterday, November 11th. So the rankings don't come out till tomorrow. I probably should have waited, but they're currently ranked at number 16 in the NCAA. So they are currently out of the playoffs as I speak. So they might miss the playoffs, is what I'm basically saying. But they did just win, right? No, wait, I'm looking at the wrong team. Yeah, they just beat Georgia, who was a pretty high seed as well. So they might sneak into the playoffs. We will see. But as of right now, they're out of the playoffs, and they might make it, they might not. If they do make it to the playoffs, let's say, I do think that it'll be huge for Jaxson Dart. Put him on the big stage, see what he can do against some of the best teams in the NCAA, which he plays a lot of the best teams already anyway. Overall, though, Jaxson Dart, I think, has a solid arm. Not great, but not bad. He can be a dual threat with his legs. Not special, but he can run when need be. Honestly, Jaxson Dart pretty much seems to do well. Good, maybe even great in every category, but not the best in any category either. So basically what I'm saying is I don't think any team is going to view Jaxson Dart as that guy. I don't think anyone's going to see him as the quarterback that they need to pick. They can't miss out on in the first round, which is why I think Jaxson Dart is not going to be a first round draft pick, but he's definitely going to get drafted, and I currently have him getting drafted in the second round to the LA Rams. I think the Rams are probably going to purge their backups after this year. Jimmy G and Stetson Bennett aren't really the future there, and Matt Stafford's not getting younger. So I think they're going to look at this draft, and if they have the opportunity, a guy like Jaxson Dart on the board in the second round when they're picking, I think they could view that as the guy once Matt Stafford steps away. Now, that's not necessarily what they think, but I think that that's something that they could think about. And Jaxson Dart, I think, would be a perfect guy to sit back and learn behind Matt Stafford for a couple years. And then give him an opportunity, probably going to have to fight off competition once Matt Stafford retires. But I think he'd have a good opportunity in a couple years down the road to be a starter for that Rams team. Now, I did say he doesn't have an amazing arm, so he's not going to be like a Matt Stafford replacement, but I think he can make pretty much any throw he needs to. So I think he could be a really good guy there in LA. After Jaxson Dart, I think there is a pretty large drop off once again, and that is to Dillon Gabriel. Now, a lot of you guys are probably not going to like that I said that about Dillon Gabriel because he is a very, very good NCAA quarterback, maybe even the best college quarterback this year. That's debatable, for real. But Dillon Gabriel out of Oregon, he's thrown for 2,848 yards, thrown 22 touchdowns and 5 interception. He is a absolute stat machine on the number one team in the nation of that is Oregon right now. Now, he's played really well against tough competition this year so far. He's a dual threat also. He can run when he needs to, when he wants to. He's seemingly been in college forever, which makes him a bit of an older prospect. He's 23. He'll be 24 next year for the NFL season. So that's something working against him in the draft. They don't generally like older quarterbacks, although Michael Penix and Bo Nix both got drafted last year pretty high. So maybe that's something of the past. Dillon Gabriel, he's a smart and very accurate with the ball. His main weaknesses, though, are the unfortunate ones, which is why he is dropping, and I don't think he will be a first-round pick. Now, if Oregon probably will go on a playoff run, but if Dillon Gabriel looks freaking phenomenal in the playoff run, wins the championship, possibly wins the Heisman, although there's some pretty big names in the Heisman race. If he does all that, I think he's definitely got a case being a first-round pick, but his weaknesses are what's holding him back for sure, and that is his small stature is the big one. He's maybe 6 foot tall. That's what it says. I think there's a case to be said he's 5'11", maybe even 5'10". And he has a lack of arm talent, really. I mean, he has a good arm. Don't get me wrong. Like, he's not bad, obviously. He wouldn't be on the best team in the nation, probably, if he had a bad arm. But he's not going to be able to make those over-the-top throws that you want for your vertical threats in the NFL. So I think that's going pretty tough. That's pretty big against him when NFL teams are looking for that quarterback that they want to lead their franchise for the next 10, 15, maybe even 20 years, you know. He's also a lefty, which it's not like crazy to us, a lefty. Michael Penix just got drafted first round as a lefty, but, you know, some teams are going to see that and be like, you know what, our right tackle is absolutely garbage, so maybe we don't want a left-handed quarterback or something of that nature. So that's slightly going against him, I suppose. But like I said, playoff success and a lack of an obvious top candidate could, in theory, propel Dillon Gabriel to a higher draft slot, possibly first-round draft spot. But in my opinion, right now, after Week 11 has been played, I do not see many teams viewing him as a starting quarterback in the NFL. So I do have him dropping a bit. Now, I can't drop him all the way to like the 7th, 6th round. He's been a very good college quarterback, so I'm not going to drop him that far. But I am going to drop him into the 4th round, mid-round draft pick, that's day 3, isn't it? Yeah, I have him dropping to day 3 in the draft, which, Oregon fans and Dillon Gabriel fans probably aren't going to like. But I have him going to the Dolphins. I think the Dolphins are going to look at possible replacements. I know Tua said he still wants to play, and he's looking pretty good again. But I think this is a solid spot for Dillon Gabriel. One, because Tua Tagovailoa has those medical concerns, the injury risk. He's theoretically like one more concussion away from retiring at this point. And on top of that, Tua's a lefty, like I said earlier. Dillon Gabriel being a top backup as a lefty as well. I think, first of all, I think he'd be a fantastic backup for Tua. And second of all, I think Mike McDaniel, the coach there, would absolutely love Dillon Gabriel as that option if Tua does go down. So I think it's a good spot. Now, there's other teams, obviously, that might want him as a possible starter. So, I mean, maybe the Dolphins aren't the number one pick that a lot of people would talk about, but I think it's a good one. It makes a lot of sense to me. So, Dillon Gabriel to Miami next year in my prediction. And number 10, the last quarterback I'm going to talk about in somewhat of a deep dive is kind of a guy that people aren't talking about from what I've noticed. People are kind of down on him right now, but at number 10, I have Riley Leonard sneaking in here. Now, out of Notre Dame, of course, he's thrown for only 1,575 yards and 9 touchdowns, along with 3 interceptions. On the ground, though, he has 609 rushing yards, which is more than Jalen Milroe, and he's added 13 rushing touchdowns to that as well. So he is a very capable dual threat quarterback here. The problems here are, well, for one, he's at Notre Dame, so there haven't really been any really tough games on the schedule that scouts like to look at. Notre Dame is in the playoff hunt, and at this point, I do think they are going to be in the playoffs. So once we see Riley Leonard against one of the top SEC teams, or maybe even Miami, I think that's going to be a big factor in his draft stock. And I think he's a guy that if he can go on a playoff run and look really good doing it, I think he could jump up all the way into one of the top rounds. Maybe not first round, but I don't think that's even out of the question. He's a pretty talented dude. And just a couple years ago on Duke, they were talking about him as a possible first round target. So I think he's a really talented guy, and I want to talk about him here. So, like I said, playoffs are going to be a big factor. The biggest team that they've really played so far was Louisville, and Riley Leonard looked pretty good against them. But, I mean, some of the cons against him, I mean, he doesn't have a huge arm like Jalen Milroe. That's, even though Jalen Milroe's not a great passer, he's got a really good arm. Riley Leonard does not have that arm, which is why he's not up there in that conversation with Jalen Milroe. And of course, with his struggles throwing the ball in this offense, he is being labeled as a project quarterback right now, which most of the other guys on this list are not going to have that label, which is also dropping him in the rankings here. Now, I do think he's definitely going to get drafted. I'd be shocked if he wasn't. And I have him also being drafted in the 4th round along with Dillon Gabriel, which once again is probably going to piss off Dillon Gabriel fans. But I have him being drafted to the Seattle Seahawks to maybe sit behind Geno Smith. I know Geno's having a kind of a rough year right now, so the Seahawks might even move on from him after this year. And I think that's a spot that you could see a surprise quarterback pick. Now, I don't have a first-round grade on him, so I don't have the Seahawks picking in the first round, but picking in the 4th round with Riley Leonard on the board still, I could see the Seahawks liking what they see there. So, yeah, Riley Leonard to Seattle. That's my 10th quarterback on my list, top 10. Now we're going to go over some just missed the cut candidates. So, if your quarterback didn't even make this list, let me know in the comments. Who am I missing? Who am I not talking about at all? Maybe you're a huge, I don't even know. Who's DJ Uungalai? I mean, he's had a horrible year, so I don't know how you could be, but maybe you want him on Just Missed the Cut or somebody else like that. Graham Mertz from Florida. I don't know. But some of the guys I wanted to mention but not really dig into. Will Howard, Ohio State. Ohio State's looked really good this year. Will Howard has some great stats, but a lot of teams aren't going to look at him as a starting caliber quarterback. Could be drafted as a backup, in my opinion. Curtis Rourke out of Indiana, having a huge year in his first year in the Power 5. I think he's a guy that's definitely put up enough numbers and looked good enough to where not only will he probably get drafted, but Indiana's probably going to be in the playoffs, which is pretty wild. They have a decent chance to make it there. So Curtis Rourke, look at him. He just looks good. So after him, Brady Cook, been a starter at Mizzou for a while now. They're not having the best year, but he's looked pretty solid his entire career, and he's a guy that I think a lot of teams are going to look at once again as a backup potential candidate. Next, I wanted to put a group of 5 player in here, so I'm going with Seth Hennigan out of Memphis. He's been a starter for a long time at Memphis, and he's been good the whole time he's been there. So I think he's a guy that teams are going to look at as a solid backup candidate as well. And then we also have to mention Will Rogers out of Washington, transferred over to Washington this year, and he's looked pretty solid. Not overly great like Will Howard, but pretty solid in his own right. Another guy that I see as a possible backup candidate there. So those are the quarterbacks I think are the top guys in the draft right now. Let me know what you think about my picks. If you disagree, agree with any of them. If I'm absolutely ridiculous for having Riley Leonard up there in the top 10. If Will Howard not making the top 10, or Will Rogers even not making the top 10 is, an abysmal thing for me to say. Nutmeg wants to say hi. Yeah, that's my cat. She's awesome. But, yeah, until next time, later, fam.